Cesar Chavez became a big name in the farming industry by fighting for not just the union and better rights in the farming world, but for equality and justice in the Mexican world. He motivated farm workers to strike and fight for their rights, especially a union, and inspired many American citizens to strike until the farm workers had obtained their rights in the 1960s. In the short term, Chavez had grown a large following, but in the long term, Chavez and the workers had won, eventually making the United Farm Workers an officially recognized union by the government. Putting people to work in the fields began in the late 1800s with the Chinese. Then came the Mexicans and Filipinos. At the time, the Chinese farm workers were paid, on average, less than the Mexicans were. The Alien Land Law was passed soon after, in 1913, 14 years before Cesar Chavez was born. The Alien Land Law was put into place to ensure that immigrants couldn't own land, and those that did had to give their land to a superior, who at the time were white Americans. But that's just some background knowledge for you. On March 13, 1927, Cesar Chavez was born, and he would later be the second of 5 siblings. He was born on a family farm in Yuma, Arizona. When he was 10, his family was forced to give up their farm, and by 1930, 70,000 Mexicans and 23,000 Filipinos were living in California and working on farms. The average work times for the laborers were over 10 hours, and the workers got sick due to the chemicals in the plants and the lack of drinkable liquids out in the fields. Chavez's first experience of strikes was at age 12, when his father picketed at a dried fruit strike. Here, his father showed Chavez the value of hard work and determination and tried to join other strikes with different unions. Like most Mexican families at the time, Chavez and his family weren't able to keep a stable job throughout their career and had to move around the state of California in order to be able to work, and even then, the family could barely keep up with the hunger, and they had to live in tents. The family moved around so much that Chavez had gone to 38 different schools by the time he was only in 8th grade. Chavez felt the injustice and inequality in the system, and dropped out of school at age 15 in order to help support his family. At age 17, Chavez enlisted in the U.S. Navy for a 2-year term, and at age 19, he joined the National Agricultural Workers Union. Chavez and other Mexican Americans were often discriminated against. They would have to sit in the back of the movie theaters, and he wasn't even allowed in certain restaurants. Because of this, he would often volunteer with the community service organization to help many Mexican Americans do a variety of things that they normally couldn't do, like get a passport, get a driver's license, buy a home, and get different types of jobs. In California, Chavez resigned as president of the CSO since they refused to organize the farm workers. From 1962 to 1965, Chavez returned to Delano to organize the farm workers by himself. During this time, Chavez was doing poorly financially and was barely able to create the National Farm Workers Association with $1,200 of his life savings, along with Dolores Huerta, and would sometimes beg his workers to give him food while organizing the farm workers. Soon, the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee began to strike when the growers cut the pay rates in half. Chavez encouraged the NFWA to join these strikes, and he immediately rose up and became the leader. By 1965, the NFWA had 1,700 members, but Chavez decided that they still weren't strong enough for a solo strike, but later started a 5-year strike walking from Delano to Sacramento. In 1966, the NFWA merged other unions to become the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, which later changed their name to United Farm Workers of America. In 1968, Huerta and Chavez began their first strike with the flag. The flag was red and decorated with a black eagle inside of a white circle. Their motto was Viva la Causa, which translates to Long Live the Cause. Chavez was committed to a non-violent protest, but there was still lots of violence for the strikers, and so he fasted for 28 days. This was the first of his fastings. Chavez gained the support of many people, including government officials. By this time, 13 million Americans stopped buying and eating table grapes, and this showed that the strikes were effective, and they continued. The strikes would show how much in poverty the farm laborers were, and were often done non-violently since the laborers had less physical force than the growers. In 1970, the growers caved and agreed to terms and conditions of Chavez's union, and they signed the contract later in the year. However, in the same year, Chavez attacked the lettuce growers. In 1973, the grape growers failed to renew their contracts from before, and the union attacked them again. The reason this time was to stop the farmers from using toxins and pesticides in the grapes. This strike lasted toward the 80s, as both strikes ended in 1978. Shortly after the strikes, collective bargaining between the farm workers was allowed, but only in California, and in turn resulted as the first union for farm workers ever made, and many more had begun to pop up. Once the demands of the strikes were met, the lives of the farm workers greatly improved, and the first law, the ability to organize farm workers, was passed by Governor Jerry Brown of California. Long after the strikes, people began to volunteer and donate to the farm worker cause, and to this day, people are still there, working on farms to ensure that we have food on our table. Thousands of people were affected, and in fact, 35,000 people showed up to Chavez's funeral, and a year after he died, Chavez received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, as the second Mexican American to win this award. Friends and family of Chavez created the Cesar Chavez Foundation in order to help educate children, and make sure that Chavez's visions were still in place. Mexican Americans aren't discriminated as badly as they were, and are treated with equality all around the world. In 2012, Diego Luna directed a movie based on Cesar Chavez titled Cesar Chavez, and focused around the hardship of farm laboring. In conclusion, Chavez inspired many people to live by his standards, allowing way for good in the world. Chavez is important in our world because he allowed people to improve their lives, and gave the sense of justice through more than just a few communities, allowing way for equality and independence throughout the Mexican world and America.